Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Grieving Voices. If this is your first time listening, thank you for being here. And if you are returning, thank you for coming back. Today, my guest is D Paul Fleming. He is a retired and disabled U.S. Navy veteran, life coach, business consultant, public speaker, and published author. In alignment with his Native American heritage and spiritual gifts, he is also a seasoned holy man, spiritual advisor, and healer. And today we are going to be talking about your work and what you're doing for veteran suicide. And so I'm very honored to have you as a guest. I am also a veteran. My husband is a veteran. I come from a long line of veterans. And so thank you for sharing your story today and for bringing this awareness to my podcast.
Well, I'm grateful to be on your show. Thank you so much for having me.
Often people do the work that they're doing because they often have a personal story and there's something that led them to take that path of being a healer, being a spiritual advisor, um, in your work, doing the work that you're doing with veterans and suicide. But I want to start back in your early life and what were the messages and lessons that you've experienced in grief and trauma or anything in childhood? Because what I have found is that, especially people who have had a lot of grief or trauma in their childhood and they go into the military, it can be compounded. And and I really firmly believe that there's a larger conversation there as terms of when it comes to ACEs, like adverse childhood experiences, and with veterans. So I want to dig deeper into that later in the conversation. So we'll put a pin in that, but let's start first with your origin story, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's a big topic to cover. I actually put it out in the very first book that I ever wrote, 2,442 Steps to Crazy, and it kind of takes you from my first memory, which is being tossed through the air and hitting the corner of a couch and breaking a couple bones through the my last day with um, the stepfather, which I call crazy for good reason. Um, the part that kind of dovetails into a veteran's life is everything I wrote in that book. I never talked about. I've been married for, as I like to say, 50 years, right? And never said anything to my wife, and certainly never said anything to my kids. So when I wrote the first book of my childhood, and handed it to my wife in published form. It was the first time she knew anything about it. Took her a few days to kind of come around to talk to me, and when she did, the first things out of her mouth was, "You weren't abused, you were tortured." It kind of made me draw back and say, I never really looked at it that way. You know, from my experience, abused children kind of blame themselves for everything, right? So whether you really believe it's your fault or not, that's kind of the overall feeling that you're left with, that life of, being told from first memories to, when you finally get out of those situations, that you're nothing. You're never going to amount to anything. You're terrible. You're why I'm this and that and so on. The verbal abuse is probably the most destructive. The physical abuse, the broken bones, the concussions, all the things that I had to survive through, um, are not as memorable as the verbal abuse. That sticks with me to this day, and it's very very difficult to overcome. Very difficult.
What did that look like for you in overcoming it? I mean, I imagine that it was very therapeutic to write the book, but how did you get to that point where you were even able to put it into words on paper?
Yeah, I do my best to try and keep these answers not long winded, but to really answer that is a very very long conversation. So let me see if I can kind of cliff note it. As far back as I can remember, I've had a deep deep faith. And at, a couple of points in my life, I got pretty pissed off and started blaming God and so on, as many of us do that live through tough stuff, right? Saying my faith is kind of my cornerstone. And even in the darkest times when I was, terrified and terrorized and brutalized, I always had in the back of my head somewhere that feeling, that sense that something was there watching over me. And kind of fast forward through life, if you will. Um, it started coming to me that I need to write this book. I need to start telling these stories. And I had an argument with myself, the baby Jesus, God, every spirit known to man, forever. I'm not writing a book. I'm not telling a story. Who the hell wants to hear my crap, right? Nobody's going to read this. Nobody. Well, I finally had to give up and say, all right, fine. If the baby Jesus is going to leave me alone, I better write this book. So I sat down and wrote the book, and that was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. It took me a year and a half to write it, but I wrote it 4 or 5 times, threw it out, started over. It was difficult, but once I got through remembering, and then my wife reading the book, the relief that started coming along, and again, it didn't all happen at once. It kind of happened as I was writing it, but the relief that came along was transforming. I mean, it really was. It was like spring cleaning or emptying your closet, getting all the crap out of there and turning a light on. I could see what what had happened to me, and I still blame myself, of course, right? I can't undo that piece, but I don't feel the burden of self blame, you know. And then, of course, when I start talking to other people who start telling their stories, I'm like, geez, I'm dumbfounded at how many people had, abusive childhoods or relationships, and how many people have come to me and said that this book has helped them. And between this and some of my other stuff that I've written, I've had people, especially veterans, come to me and say, quote, your book saved my life, unquote. So that's kind of where, that's kind of the cliff notes that um, got me to write the books and tell the story. And then after you do a couple hundred podcasts, you kind of start getting, I don't want to say numb to it, but it's a lot easier to talk about it.
May I ask what happened? Where was your father, your biological father, and your
So he's
mother?
not my father.
Yep, your
Oh, my
biological father
biological father.
and your
Yeah,
mother.
I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea. My mother had first myself and my brother, out of wedlock, and um, never met him. My brother's never met his father, and then my mother hooked up with crazy and had a couple kids. But I don't know. My lineage goes through my mother to my grandfather, who was a full blooded Native American, jumped the reservation and the Carlisle schools, if you will, joined the Navy, claimed he was white, and rose to the ranks of being an enlisted man, riding submarines in World War II, to retiring in 1965 as a lieutenant. Still disowning his Native American heritage, because again, back then you were a cook or a bosun's mate, right? If you were black, Native American, so that's kind of the extent of my lineage. I know that I know from my mother, I know pieces of who the guy was, but you know, never met him.
And as far as the relationship with your mother, because I imagine she's, brought this gentleman into your home, and was there, it was, I imagine it was just a home of chaos, but what did you, were you able to have a relationship with her?
No,
Okay.
no, no. I to this day, I still can't understand how a mother can, let somebody abuse her child. I mean, I just don't. I don't understand how people can hit women. I just don't. It's something I've screamed about my whole life. You just don't hit women. Period. Period. You just don't do it. And you don't hit kids. I got 6 kids, but I got to tell you, I'd love to smack a few of them around, right? Knock some Jesus, right? But it's just not. It's not what you do. Again, I'm not telling people you can't smack your kid on the ass and crack him in the mouth for cussing you or something. I'm not telling you how to raise your kid. What I am telling you is, there's a pretty significant difference between smacking the kid on the butt and breaking his arm, or the scar on my nose is from waking up with waking up when I had something thrown at me in the middle of the night from crazy, and I'm plastered in blood and no idea what the hell's going on. That's abuse. I mean, that's just brutal, brutal abuse, right? So, no, there was never a relationship. You know, don't really talk to my mother much. She's in her 80s now. Um, I've seen her once in the last, I don't know, year, but I've probably only seen her 2 or 3 times in the last 5 or 10 years. You know, so
Sometimes in cases of abuse, there's one child that kind of gets the brunt of everything, but sometimes all the
winner, baby, winner. I was the one.
so you were you the only one that then were all the children abused to some degree, or was it pretty much just you? Like it's
Yeah, my brother would get smacked around, and I had 2 younger sisters. They never got touched, But I was, like the dog in the pound, right? I'd step in between them. Okay,
mm,
and I would defend my mother. I'd defend my siblings. Um, I would even instigate to get his attention on me, so that he wouldn't, start beating on the other ones. Um, but my brother has a completely different outlook on all of it. You know, um, we don't talk about it. When I told him I was writing this book, he got pretty upset. I
mm.
mean, bent out of shape. But he doesn't judge me. I don't judge him. So kind of we're still good friends, right? But just some subjects we don't talk about. He sees he sees our mother. You know, I don't want to say every day, but he's constantly with her, around her. You know,
And there's grief in that, right? Like the loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations of what a family unit could have been and what could have been. I imagine that maybe you have kind
yeah,
of through at some point.
yeah. I was never able to identify fairly what I wanted for a family. And when I hooked up with my wife, she had 2 kids, and we had 4 together. So from day one, I felt lost. I didn't know how to be a father, right? So I would do as much digging as I could to find out how to do things, and I, couldn't tell you if I was a good father, bad father. I just know that I did everything I could to the best of my ability. They never went hungry. They never went without. Paid for their colleges. Paid for cars. Did it all. But I'm not a classic father of the sense who I never missed any of the kids' sporting events from for decades, right? I was always there, but again, I'm kind of a veteran all by itself is an outcast to a degree, right? We don't really fit in anywhere else. And I kind of preach to veterans, stop trying to fit in as a civilian. We're not civilians. Let's accept who we are, right? And be us, right? We don't have to fit in anywhere. So, and I'm very good at not fitting in, right? You know, so
Excuse me.
there.
Sorry.
You need a cough drop?
I don't. It's just a tickle. Just a
Here's a
tickle.
cough drop, though.
I'm so sorry.
It's all good.
Um, one of the things that came up for me as I was listening to you is sometimes what happens is too, like children will, I mean, they run away a lot. In the case of abuse, they'll run away. Is that like, did you run away? And I
So
mean, did you leave
how
home
funny is that?
early?
So how funny is that? Along the lines of running away, I in book 2 of a date with no 2,442 steps to crazy. That's about my personal life, right? In book 2, I start talking about this family, Frankie Polari's old Italian family, right? Um, and I mean old Italian. Parents didn't speak English. All right, wine in the shed, grapes, all of it. Okay. Well, it was a number of months ago. I haven't seen Frankie Polari in 50 years, right? Okay. But he used to have two or three of the most beautiful sisters on the planet. Again, when you're 10 years old, right? You know, any woman that puts her hand on your shoulder, like, oh my God, right? I'm in love. Okay. Well, my wife and I are at this farm uh, shop, not far from our house. I haven't been there in forever. And this girl's looking at me and she's looking at me. And finally she says, "Are you Doug Fleming?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why?" She goes, "I'm Frank Polari's sister." I'm like, "You got to be kidding me." All right. Well, why am I saying that? Well, I think I ran away to Frank Polari's shed 3 or 4 times. I don't remember, but she bought the book and she was unbelievably shocked at the level of abuse because they had seen it. You know, I used to run away there and eat and hide until they kind of turned me back over like the Gestapo, right? But yeah, I ran away. I don't know how many times. I mean, I ran away so many times I never really counted them, you know. And then the final time, the ending of the book, you know, wait till you read that. I mean, that was the ending of Steps to Crazy. Okay, you want to talk about something that's gonna make you um, think about anything and everything that's happened in your life? Because I sat there on the razor's edge. Okay, was I going to be murdered or was I going to commit murder?
Mm.
Right? Which was it? Was it self defense? Okay. Because it was one hell of a brawl the last time I was under Crazy's roof. Right.
How
And
old were
the
you?
last time the cops broke um, 14,
Mm.
13 or 14. And that was it. I've been on my own ever since. So I
Where
left.
did you go?
So I lived in the streets for a while. My first hiding place was a cemetery, but that didn't work out real well because turns out more homeless people hang out in cemeteries and you can shake a stick at. And again, this is back 50 years ago. All right. So now I lived in a cemetery, but I had strategically placed in different chunks of woods, um, survival gear. Because when I couldn't take it anymore, I would leave and hide in the woods for a few days, and finally you get so cold, so tired. There's only so much you can do, you know. But yeah, so used to live in the woods, and then in and out of state shit for a while, and that was horrible. That was horrific, and I mean horrific. So I was determined never to go back to the state care. And then again, if you have faith, folks that have a belief in the supernatural, God, and so on, you kind of know that you go through things, and then right when you think it's all over, right, something walks in and kind of helps you out. Well, for me, there was two people, two families that kind of took me in, and as I like to say, I would be either dead or in prison if it wasn't for them. So if you're thinking about being a foster parent or helping out, some young punk on the street, well, I'm here to tell you, you can change lives. You can change history.
My husband and I have talked about it actually.
Yeah,
Um,
even temporary. You know, even temporary, right? Holidays are just even to this day, holidays to me are a nightmare. I can't stand them. Absolutely can't stand them. Hate Christmas. Hate my birthday. Right? Don't want anything to do with it. Right? But why? Because my memories of those events are horrific. Right? And I don't mean horrific as in you didn't get presents or any of that. I mean you know holidays are stressful enough when you're young, raising kids. Right? You know, stressful, paying bills. Right? Now mix crazy into that mess. Okay, and I do mean crazy, right?
what happened to him? Was he ever arrested? Was he ever, I mean, was your mom married to him long after you
Yep,
left? And
yep. Here, you ready? You ready to throw up? He died at the age of 73, and my family asked me to read his eulogy. Okay, yeah. Hand to God, I did.
You
Okay,
did?
oh, I did. Okay, again, I when I say I would do anything for my family, I have. Okay, some of the hardest things I've ever done in my life have been done because my family has asked me to do something, right? And again, my wife said to me, "If you don't read it, nobody's going to read it." You know, so I said, "What do you think?" She goes, "I think you should read it." Of course, she didn't know anything about it, right? Because the book
Did she
only came
tell
out.
you your story at the time?
No, nobody did.
Mm.
Nobody did. So we were supposed to be down in Florida at a wrestling event for three of my kids who were in high school, but we had to put that off to the side, and that left me with you know the two oldest and my youngest, who was probably, I don't know, 7 or 8. So I'm up there in St. Joe's Church. I've got some great stories about St. Joe's Church, by the way. It's a pretty cool place. Anyway, and I mean, I'm struggling. I'm struggling internally. I'm having a fist fight of how in God's name can I be standing here doing this, right? The other side of my brain is saying, listen, just suck it up, get it done, right? You know that veteran military approach, right? Just get it over with. Just get it done. Get it done. Get it done. Get it done. And then I got stuck. Okay, and I mean stuck. All of a sudden, I see my youngest kid hop out of the pew and comes bounding down the aisle up onto the center stage of the church and grabs my hand, looks at me, and goes, "You got it." I was like, okay, right. So I understood the importance of doing things, especially things you really don't want to do. I wasn't there for him, and I certainly wasn't there for me. I was there for what funerals are meant to be, for those who are living, right? So of course I didn't say any of the bad stuff. I just kind of, fluttered in a few things that certain people would pick up on, all right, but others wouldn't. Now, let me dovetail that into another short, quick story. Anybody that believes in the afterlife and paranormal, okay, if you've gone through any form of trauma, abuse, or even a um, life and death situation, okay, I always say you get a peek behind the veil, okay. You get so close to Jesus when you're in those moments that you can actually see on the other side of the veil, okay. One of the things that used to drive crazy, was that I could see things that nobody else could. So I could see what was around him, and the amount of darkness and evil that was around him is staggering. Okay. So I would point things out as a kid, and it would make him go crazy. Okay. Or crazier. Right. So here I am sitting in this church knowing these things and knowing how evil he was. And it kind of hit me as my youngest son, Dakota's holding my finger, right? He's holding on, he's kind of got his head up against my thigh. And I'm saying, all right, so that's the life he led. Now I understand why he was so terrified to die,
Mm.
because now judgment's coming into play. Okay. And I survived all of that. And I spent my life helping people. Even back as a kid, I'd help people. Right. And it kind of dawned on me. It's like, all right, just keep living as clean a life as you can. And again, I'm no angel. Trust me on that. Right. But he was so terrified of dying that he did everything he could right to his last breath. And I'm sitting here saying, listen, man, today's a good day to die, right? I've got no regrets, right? I've done the best that I can. I'm happy to go see the baby Jesus. I'm sure I've got some things to answer for. I will, but nothing like he has to, right? How's that grab you?
It's a perspective I think that people don't think about. in people, as far as like people in our lives who maybe didn't live the most loving of a life, who might be holding on and afraid, like you said. Um, it's a different perspective. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So to all our fellow vets out there, remember, I'm not advocating, that today's a good day to die. What I am telling you is that if you've lived your life every day to the best of your ability, then don't be afraid to die. Okay. There's good stuff on the other side. Okay. But that doesn't give you permission or my consent to commit suicide. It's not happening. Okay. You do that and you know, I don't want to say it. I'm going to say it this way, but it's not really how I mean it. Okay. If you commit suicide, you give up all that good stuff that you did, right? Suck it up. Let's keep moving forward. Okay. And whenever you do get into the part about talking about suicide, listen, I lived it. All the anxiety, all the pain, I get it. Okay. But you gotta look at everything you suffered through, everything you're dealing with, and say keep dealing with it one more day. And tomorrow is going to be another day and it will get better. I guarantee it. It's got to get better. It's got to.
You have to have hope.
Faith, right?
Faith. Yeah.
Right?
And
You
hope.
got to have faith. You got to have faith in something. Okay. And
What what do you think kept you, because you're sitting here, right? And you're talking about suicide. I imagine you came close,
yes.
maybe tempted.
Yeah. As I write in my book, A Date with Suicide, the first two um, paragraphs call it out. I sat there with the opportunity and the means. Okay. Not just once, right? But why didn't I finish what I started?
How
Right.
old were you?
The first time,
Mhm.
I sat there, I would um mid 20s, mid 20s. But as I said, I was a keynote speaker in North Carolina American Legion Gala for suicide awareness. And Lori, who has the Christmas trees with suicide uh, veterans photos on them coming in from all over the country. It's great. She's doing a great thing for all veterans. Anyway, um, uh, I, 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 it's okay. I point out that everything I went through, including the military, I never thought of suicide until I left the VA for the first time in my life. And when I walked out of the VA, and that's in one of these chapters in here, okay, I remember saying, I'll kill myself before I get caught in that nightmare, in this mess. Okay. And it didn't really dawn on me until I sat down and wrote the book, A Date with Suicide. And I had to answer my own question. When did I first say it? When did I first think about killing myself? And then I think about all the shit I did, up until I was 14 and how I survived all that. And then the military, right? Right? I never thought of killing myself until I got in the quagmire of the VA. So when I say the VA is PTSD, the VA is suicide, listen, I'm living proof. And I can't tell you how many veterans I talk to that say the exact same thing. Okay. The backstop, the net, if you will, that's supposed to be there for us just simply isn't. It just simply isn't. So expectations of the VA are like the rest of expectations in our lives, right? Expectations, the mother of all letdown, right? So if you don't have hope and purpose, if you don't have faith, what is your net? What's the net that's carrying it?
Can you share a little bit more about that? Just because I'm personally curious, because on the flip side of that coin, I've had a really wonderful experience with the VA. So was my husband. So it could be your location, to be fair. And so what was it that there just weren't the services there, or there was a delay, or there wasn't enough help?
Yeah. So I'm going to spin that around on you. Um, the reality is there's a handful of VAs that are doing well. And I mean a small handful. There's a facility down in Fort Myers, Florida, that I've heard great things about, but it's a small. place. Okay.
Mhm.
And for the most part, the VA system, if you can find a functioning group inside that VA, so let's just say you're having, um, you just need checkup, you just need basic healthcare, and you get into a VA that has a good doctor in there, right? Listen, people have great experiences from them. I've seen World War II vets that have said to me, they treat me like a king in here. It's great. And I hear them saying this as we're walking out or others are walking out ready to kill themselves, right?
Mm.
So I think it has a lot to do with, yeah, location. Okay. But what are the limits of the issues of the veterans who say, you know, they they've had a good experience with VA. When I listened to the director of the American Legion say that he's talking with veterans all over the country, and he says, and he brags about this. The one thing I haven't heard is anybody complain about the health care they get at the VA. Okay, I mean that draws me so far back that I've I've stopped getting my Legion magazine because that is so misleading. It's sick, right? When you sit here and when you watch the hearing last week where the VA was called before Congress and a Navy SEAL congressman looks at these arrogant bastards and the VA rep says, well, in the last 2 years, statistically, veterans who call the 988 number are 10 times more likely to commit suicide within the next 12 months. Again, don't believe me, just Google it. Okay. It's an open hearing in Congress. Okay. Then he has the audacity to say, but our numbers are 30% down on suicide. Again, that's just a bold faced lie.
Mhm.
It's just an absolute abstract lie. Okay. So folks that have a good experience in the VA tend to have a primary doctor somewhere in there that's kind of overseeing what's going on. Okay. But I guarantee you, you pull that doctor out, the whole thing collapses. It's everyone I've talked to can relate to one person or one department, so to speak. All right. I personally have been in the system for what, 40 years? Okay. Plus or minus. I have had somewhere north of 30 different primary doctors.
Wow.
Okay. Oh, let me correct that. Half of them aren't doctors. Right. I had one doctor who was, his license was taken away. Okay. The best doctor that I had flat out said to me, she says, I can't take this anymore. I'm leaving. The best mental health therapist that I had left. Right. So the inconsistency, the inability to have trust and confidence in the VA is a key factor. Now, when you take someone like me, I'm already walking into a fight, right? That's just the way it's been for me for over 40 years. When you see somebody new coming off the street and they go to the VA and they have an initial great experience, okay, well, what are the issues? What are you going to the VA for? Are you going to solve physical pain, mental pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain? What are you going to solve? The VA does some things very well, like limbs, right? But what do they do for spinal cord injuries? They're horrible unless you get into a couple of the niche places that have high end doctors that are affiliated with universities. In Connecticut, Yale University is affiliated with the VA. But if you read the history of the VA and Yale New Haven, in 1986, they got caught by the OIG for injecting patients with experimental crap that was killing dozens and dozens of veterans. That's widespread throughout the VA. And again, I'm going to step down off my VA bashing box, if you will, and tell you when I first went to the VA, it was in Boston. Now, I've been in VAs up and down the East Coast, right? I had to go to the seventh floor. And the short version is when I got off the elevator, and I write about it extensively in the book. When I got off the elevator, the hallways were lined with veterans. There was feces and urine everywhere. It stunk to high hell. There were veterans with their arms out begging to help. Please help me, help me, help me. Okay. I'm in my early 20s going, what the fuck did I just walk into? All right. I was discharged from Navy at the end of my 4-year active hitch to VA because I got hurt, physically got hurt. Okay, a couple of times. So I'm there for I don't know why. My assumption was that to solve the problem of why am I in so much pain? What happened? Okay. Right. Next thing I know, I'm in a closet with a mop and a bucket and a guy in a white jacket who says he's a doctor. Spend 5 minutes with him and he says, we'll have a decision to you soon. That was it. That was my experience with the VA. It took all day. I got there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and at 3:30 in the afternoon, that's when I saw the doctor. Okay. And I write about it extensively in the book. For the next 10 years, that's how the system operated. Okay. Until they finally medically retired me. Now, fast forward to 2018, when they signed the Choice Act. Okay. And I went to private care after 30 years, 40 years. I finally got answers by going to the Yukon Health, getting into Yukon Health. All right. Not only did I get answers, they solved problems. They solved problems the VA couldn't even imagine. Okay. My shoulder, the last time I was at the VA was roughly 2010 for any form of treatment, physical treatment. I was going in for a steroid injection, right? Or am I saying steroid right? I think it's not steroid, but injection,
Mhm.
cortisone. Okay. So the lady pulls my shirt up. It's a doctor. Pulls my shirt up, jabs a needle in and squeezes. Okay. I start screaming. Now, again, I never go to the VA without somebody, normally my wife. Okay. This thing hurt for weeks on end. Right. Now, fast forward 8, 9 years. When I went to private care, they say, yeah, cortisone injection would help. They pull out this, now I'm paranoid, right? They pull out all this hardware and they're scoping it and everything else, and they direct this needle into this spot. And the pain of the needle hurt. But once they took that out, the relief that I got in my shoulder was night and day. Right. So when you want to talk about veterans who commit suicide or on that path, mental pain is one of the forefront reasons for suicide. You just can't take it anymore. Physical pain we can deal with, but when you start adding or decreasing physical pain, it affects you mentally, affects you emotionally, it affects you spiritually, right? So all of a sudden I'm in private care and I'm starting to get answers. They solved the problem of my lower spine where the VA for, 20, 30 years said there's nothing wrong with you. Okay. Well, it turns out there was a little bone chip in there that there was something wrong with me and it was cutting my fecal sac. Okay. Now that's 30 years in the VA, 2 appointments at private care, and we solved the problem. Okay. And I can run down the list of things that private care took care of that VA said either I was crazy, it doesn't exist, or they had no logic for it. And I've got all of my every record ever. I've got my MRIs, I've got my X-rays, all of it, all my medical record. Okay. Anyway, when you look at the VA and people like me who are struggling to figure out what's wrong with me, and the VA doesn't give you answers, okay, what's left? Suicide.
Yeah, and I can totally understand that. Totally see that. And the Choice Act was probably the best thing they've ever done just to handle the influx of the veterans that are needing care that aren't getting it. And so, even for my husband and I, like that was a huge positive for us as well. Um, I can say from my standpoint of I I facilitate a program called the Grief Recovery Method, and I tried for the first 2 years. I got certified in early 2019, and I attended a mental health summit for veterans that was put on by the VA, and the topic was suicide. And never once was I mean, they had social, it was a room full of social workers, psychologists, therapists, whatever. Not once did they use the word grief. Not a once. They didn't even mention trauma. Not once. So afterwards, I go up to this psychologist and I talk to her a little bit and I share with her what I've been trying to do because I had meetings with local VA. I had meetings with our CBOC, the CBOC, the local VA, and then also the veterans, what is it called? I can't, like, it escapes my brain right now, but they facilitate services for in the community. It's um, outside of the VA, but it's affiliated with the VA, of course, ran by social workers and things. Talk to them about the program. Because the Grief Recovery Institute has been trying to get this program onto Military One Source for years. It changes lives. So that hasn't been happening. So what they've been doing is the Institute has been training chaplains and social workers within the system and anybody who's willing to get certified with who are already in the system. But it's like for the military to say that this is an approved service has been so much bureaucratic red tape. I gave up after 2 years. I was just like, I wasn't getting anywhere. Doors slammed in my face. Well, we already have our thing. We already do a certain thing. They didn't want to hear it. And it's like, I'm telling you, as a veteran myself, this changed my life. It's changing people's lives. They didn't want to hear it.
So in that group of college boys, as I love to call them, how many of them talked about the with this topic of suicide? How many talked about mental pain?
All of them. I mean, there were people that shared, there were soldiers that shared their stories.
Okay. How many
One,
talk about emotional pain?
all of them.
How many talk about spiritual pain?
I think one guy, even to your point, like he was homeless, ended up homeless for a time. And of course he didn't say the word spiritual, that his spirituality suffered, but that's what happens. That even happens just with anybody in grief often. You know, we struggle with like answering those questions, like why me? And God did this to me. And of course that's going to translate into having someone to blame, right? And so who do you blame? You blame God. I did. I had my own traumas and stuff in childhood. I mean, that's what happens. So yeah,
So how
it's
many of the VA employees, okay, talk about the four corners of what leads to suicide: physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional pain
Mhm.
or trauma?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's like they didn't talk. I mean, granted, this was maybe they do now, but at their summits or whatever. But this was
Nope.
6 years ago, 5 years ago.
Nope. When this came out, I was shocked at the number of professionals that um, responded and posted reviews. One lady said she was a VA trauma nurse for 30 years, dealing in the mental health industry. I think she was in Coatesville, all right, Pennsylvania. Um, she said she wrote a review saying, after 30 years of dealing with this, you're the first veteran who actually told the story. She's been trying to get veterans to tell their story, what happened to them for 30 years, and nobody would, right? Now, I know the reason why. The reason is nobody trusts the VA. So you're not going to tell them stuff, right? So when you want to talk about suicide and the VA solving the problem, listen, oil and water, it's not happening.
Mhm.
Okay. First and foremost, because what they do is, like you said, they surround themselves with social workers. And how many of those people are veterans?
Yeah. And they're
You know?
misinformed about grief, which is why I started this podcast.
Okay.
And you
Well,
work that out.
how many of those people at that seminars with the college degrees and the social working experiences, how many of them are veterans?
I couldn't tell you, but I'm pretty sure probably very few.
I agree. Coming out of World War II, what did they say at the VA? World War II veterans forced the VA employees to be World War II veterans.
Mm,
Period. Period. So you had World War II veterans dealing with and relating to World War II veterans, right? The shift came when the VA started unionizing, okay, and putting all these requirements out of what you have to be to work at the VA, okay. That happened in what, 50s and 60s, right? And then Vietnam. So you go to Vietnam and you watch the number of veterans drop who work at VA to this day. You'll have people that say, I'm a veteran. And you ask them, well, what did you do? Unfortunately, far too many of them are already in the VA type system somewhere in the military. Okay. Very few of them are um, sandbox vets, right? Very few of them are submarine vets, right? Very few of them are aircraft carrier vets. Okay. So, how is a veteran who's dealing with physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional pain supposed to be able to communicate, trust, and relate to somebody who's never been there?
Hmm.
Right. This is why the veteran community, things like you're doing, are so highly successful because people like me are willing to open up with people like you. Right. I
Yeah.
didn't talk to my wife for 50 years about my childhood. Right.
Yeah. The grief recovery method was actually founded by a Vietnam veteran. So it's near and dear to my heart. But um, what has been, I mean, I could see, where do I want to take this?
Did you get all your answers from my childhood? Did you want to kind of go back there? I'm happy to talk about it.
No, I think it shapes who you become. It shapes who you are, of course. And I guess, well, let's go from you deciding and choosing the military, and particularly the Navy.
Yeah, I from as long as I can remember, I knew I was going in the military. All right.
As
And
an
again,
escape, because many people choose it as an escape.
no, no, no. Um, you just know certain things. Okay, I just knew, but I knew it from a very young age. Um, and then of course, between 14 and 17, I'm working full time. I'm trying to get through high school, so on and so on. I wasn't always a good kid, right? So the final straw was in front of a gentleman who had a very well done tie and black robe, and he sat up on a bench elevated above the rest of us, you know. And to my left was a really pissed off guy in another suit who was telling the judge what he thought, right? So judge wanted to see my enlistment papers. I wanted to go in the Marines, but I was 17, so I needed a parent to sign for me. So I had to go see my mother, right? So she wouldn't sign for the Marines, but she agreed to sign for the Navy because her father was in the Navy. So that's kind of how I ended up in the military. But it goes back to the fact that I always knew my path from as far back as I can remember was going to be going through the military.
What did you do after? I mean, so while you were in service and training and things like that, did it bring up anything from your past?
Yeah, so you're never far from it,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's always right next to you, right behind you. It's a wet blanket that'll snuggle up to you far too many times than you care to remember, right? You can't shake it. You can get past things, you can accept things, and they can stop bothering you for the most part, but they're always right there, right? But one of the things that it did for me was it taught me that you have to kill me to beat me because I won't quit. I just won't quit. All right. And that, growing up in a nasty, abusive childhood, you either quit, right, and take the beatings, or you never quit and take the beatings. Okay. I never quit. I never backed down. I never bent the knee. Every time he knocked me down, I stood back up. Well, not every time. There was times they took me out in an ambulance, but um, you know, so my focus in the military was, listen, I don't care how bad this is going to get. I ain't quitting. And then, ironically, when I went to boot camp, I was bored. It was the worst thing that happened was you got yelled at. You know, I mean, I was like, geez, this is it. This is boot camp.
Yuppie
This is
camp.
it. You know, you're getting cussed at. Oh my God, hurt me, right? But when I wrote the book, um, A Date with Suicide, and I draw on my transition, like you said, from 17 to my going to boot camp, if you will. Well, halfway through boot camp, they had appointed me master at arms, so I was in charge of everybody inside the barracks. So you remember, you get no sleep, right? Boot camp's boot camp. Okay, so you cherish your 4 hours of sleep. Anyway, 2 o'clock in the morning, I get shaken out of my rack by roving watch. He goes, "Guy's killing himself." Oh, Jesus. So I go see this kid, tough kid from the Bronx, right? Sitting there, blood everywhere. He had busted open his Bic, taken the razor and slashing his wrists and everything else. There was blood everywhere, right? And I remember saying, "You have to be effing kidding me. I'm going to lose sleep because you want to kill yourself to get out of boot camp." Okay.
Mm.
No empathy, no sympathy. I was pissed. And it didn't dawn on me until I sat down and wrote the book, A Date with Suicide, that even though the trauma of being yelled at in boot camp meant nothing to me, it was a joke. It was so traumatic for this kid that he had to go the path of getting out of the military by attempted suicide, right?
Did you know his story though? His background and his childhood?
Again, 17, 18-year-old kids, 80 of them in a barracks, right? You tend to get to know each other, but right? How well do you get to know him? So, no, I mean, he was a kid from the Bronx. Okay. Again, he wasn't a skittish kid. He was a tough kid. He was a tough kid. Right. But when I wrote it in the story, it made me lean back and realize, and it kind of solidified this statement for me. You can never judge somebody else's trauma, because what doesn't seem traumatic to you or me could be devastating to somebody else. So you can't judge their trauma. Only the person dealing with trauma can judge their trauma.
Mhm.
Okay. I don't care if you have 10 college degrees. You can't judge somebody else's trauma. It's all of that trauma is so connected to the four corners of our existence, our physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional bodies, that when a trauma happens and we think it's physical, right? You get shot, you fall out of a helicopter, you get run over by a submarine, right? Whatever it is, that's physical. But so few of us realize how spiritual, emotional, right? And mental physical trauma really is. Now take any one of those four parts and just keep mixing them, right? Think about it. When you're young and in love, right? A puppy love, your first love ever. And then she breaks up with you and your heart breaks. Which is it? Is it physical pain or is it emotional pain? Well, it's kind of both, isn't it? Because it does physically hurt. So just a girlfriend breaking up with you can send you into a traumatic fit that stays with you the rest of your life. Because every one of us can think back and say, "I remember my first love,"
Mhm.
right? But over time, the pain of that breakup kind of fades. You don't remember why. Okay. So the physical part kind of takes care of itself all by itself, but the emotional part stays there and you never heal it. So
Body part.
one thing the VA or the military never introduced: healing, right?
Mhm.
Until I sat down and started writing these books and got very deep into my own personal voyage on faith, right? I didn't think about healing because I thought it was poo poo, right? What is this healing crap? What are you supposed to heal from? How's this work? Okay. And then the more I studied, the more I dug in, the years and years of research and practice, and I realized how critical healing is. But again, if you just, you take the psychologist, they want to focus on what? Well, we've got to deal with the mental. Well, what about the physical or the spiritual? So if you're not dealing with all four, you're not solving the problem of what? Grief.
Mhm.
Because grief encapsulates the four elements of who we are. Period. Full stop. In order to solve grief, you have to address the four corners of your existence.
And you have to look at the past and address the
Why?
past, because people will say, I don't have to look at the past. The past is in the past. It's under the rug. I don't want to look at it. I don't need to look at it. I can't change it. It is what it is. That's what a lot of
Tell,
people say.
tell me why.
Why do they do that?
Why do we need to look at the past?
Because that's where our past is what informs every decision and where we are in the present. and it will influence our future unless we bring it to our awareness and look at it.
That's probably the best answer I've ever heard.
Good.
I really hope you cut that clip out of this video and you replay that on whatever medias you've got nonstop. That is the best description I've ever heard. Okay.
Good.
Now, let me
And
follow that.
I also, can I just add too that I know we've talked a lot about physical abuse and a lot about physical abuse because that's your story, but I just want listeners to be also consider, and veterans listening to this also consider that neglect in a home, this indifference of you existing, a veteran that doesn't even feel like they exist, that don't feel love or experience love, know what love is, right? And that's true for maybe a child too, that who is being physically abused, but neglect is also trauma. So I just want to clarify that too.
I absolutely agree with you. The two keys to neglect: abandonment.
Mm-hmm.
When you're neglected, you are left feeling abandoned. Okay. And anybody that's dealing with childhoods like mine or older in life and you're in an abusive relationship, you feel abandoned. So when you go looking for help, right? The cops, maybe, and they don't do anything, you're not only neglected, you're abandoned. And then you go to the VA, who you have a contract with, that swears on the Bible that they're going to take care of you. And then they do the same things that you do they did to you when you were a child.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay. You're not only neglected, but you're abandoned. And once that carves its path deep enough into your spiritual, emotional, and yes, physical bodies, it is next to impossible to get it back out. So I agree with you. You have to go into your past and tell your story. Okay. It is next to impossible to kill yourself while you're telling your story to a veteran who needs to hear your story.
Several years ago, there was this art exhibit that was kind of being shared amongst CBOCs around the country. It was like a traveling museum of sorts, or art exhibit. And what it was veterans who, the project was to paint a mask. They make a plaster of their face and they paint the mask that they've been wearing. It's like, take what you feel in this mask that you wear and paint it onto this canvas, this plaster of your face. And little snippets of their story were included with those masks. And I was standing there reading it and just like sobbing. There were so many masks and so many stories. And it's just a little small handful. But it was a way for them to share their story. And so I just want listeners to know, veterans listening, that it doesn't have to be a written story. It could be some sort of art project, or you talk about your Native American heritage. I imagine that there are so many different outlets of creativity that you could probably create a group of veterans that to come in and share their story in that sort of fashion, in a creative and arts sort of fashion. Just ideas that are just flowing through me. I just wanted to share, but it doesn't have to be a written story, is kind of why I'm sharing that.
Telling your story is the key behind it. The mask is the same thing.
Yeah.
You're telling your story by taking that mask and putting it down and saying, that's my story. For me, it's helped in one way. I do something similar is, look, we have a fire. Okay. We take all of that crap or just one piece of it, write it on a chunk of cedar, write it on a piece of paper and burn it. Okay. Now there's two parts to that. Some people look at that and go, well, you just kind of burn the piece of paper. Well, my belief is that you're burning that piece which used to reside in you and control you. And you've taken that piece out and you've sent it and you've purified it. So it is no longer.
Words have energy.
Right.
Words are energy. And so I'm glad we're getting into this healing piece, um, because I would love to hear more about that, um, as far as what your healing did look like. And one of the things, too, is I've had people on this podcast before talking about their suicide attempts and experience with suicide. And one of the things that I've learned is that connection is the antidote to suicide. And so, in what ways did you find connection healing for you? And what did your healing look like?
Yeah. So my healing is a, you know, 10, 20-year process right now. Okay. Um, but my focus is on my time with my wife and spirit. Okay. Those are the two things that I love being around. My wife's my best friend, absolutely adore her. And every chance I get, I tell the world she's an absolute saint. Okay. Not because she's walking around with a couple of wings on her back, but to me, she is a saint. Okay. The caretakers that provide for people like me are not just the salt of the earth, but God coated those folks with a piece of his own soul because that's what it takes to deal with folks like me. And there's far too many of us out there. Okay. The greatest people out there are the caretakers that take care of veterans, the wives, the spouses, okay, the siblings, right? That said, my path had to come back to finding. I live in two worlds. I live in my Native American world. My wife's Irish Catholic, and I have a deep faith in the baby Jesus. Okay. So I kind of I play in both of those worlds, right? Reconnecting with both pieces of that have brought my soul back to life. Okay. Learning how to clear, learning how to get rid of the dark energy that's in me, around me, near me, trying to creep up on me. All right. And facing things that some people will look at and go, man, that's witchcraft and crazy. It's like, well, we'll see. So once I learned and accepted things like meditation, because I swore from here to hell, there's no way I'm going to meditate. Okay. Listen, I meditate almost every single day in one form or another, whether it's a 5 minute break or whether it's an hour long kumbaya, leave me the hell alone moment. All right. But the journey of picking up those pieces that fit me, not everybody else, that fit me. I don't tell people to meditate. I encourage them to take a look at quieting your mind because once you can quiet your mind, the physical, the spiritual, and the emotional bodies follow. But your mind, like a computer, needs to reboot. And the only way to do that when you're dealing with anxiety, when you're dealing with racing thoughts, when you can't get a grip on yourselves and you can't slow down, right? You have to figure out a way to turn your brain off. For me, the first time I said, I got to do something. And that voice, right? Meditate. I said, fine. I put my head back in my chair, turned on some Native American drumming. And I said, all right, what the hell am I supposed to do now? Breathe in through my nose and out through my mouth and concentrate on my breathing. That's it. Just concentrate on this is stupid. Okay. So after the mental argument for a couple of minutes, and then all of a sudden, I realized I'm someplace else. And then as I started thinking again, I said, oh my God, it's quiet in here. And then boom, right back into my world. But for that briefest moment, I was at peace. And I said, whoa, 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 wait a minute. That barbed wire, barley nastiness that was flowing around in my gut that college boys call anxiety, the one that runs up to your throat and down to your bowels, it just rips you to shreds. It was gone. Gone. I was only gone for 5 or 10 seconds, but it was enough to make a believer out of me. So when did I start healing? Listen, I think all of these pieces
Mhm.
are healing, right? For me, I was waiting for this. Let's pour the gravy on this, and that's healing. The gravy's a healing, right? Do some work, gravy it up, We're good to go. No, it's little pieces of all of it. That first time, that 5 minute, because the next time I did it, nothing, nothing, nothing. I couldn't quiet my mind to save my life. But then the next time after that, okay, and then I was hooked. Because when you live with anxiety, and I mean brutal anxiety, and for the darndest moment it's gone, it's a whole nother world. Then it dawned on me, wait a minute. That's what it feels like when I have my second beer. That's why I suck down 2 beers as fast as I can for however many decades I drank, right? I quit drinking already. And I mean, I don't quit. I just said enough with the drinking and stopped drinking, right? But, right, beforehand, but then it clicked on me that why I drink. I drank to in part, to get rid of the anxiety, self medicating, right? But it was those aha moments of doing what? Of telling my story. Now, again, this is one version of tell your story. The other version of me telling my story is me having that conversation with myself. What happened? And then before I released this book, or before I wrote the first book, I went and saw my sister. And I said, listen, tell me if I'm crazy. Did I really get beaten like this? And man, her tears just started flowing. Okay. She's like, I don't know how many times he was going to kill you. I swore you were dead 4 or 5 times. Okay. We couldn't wake you up. We couldn't get you back. Okay. So she gave me confirmation that I wasn't crazy and imagining these things. Right. And I fear that that's what far too many of us veterans do. We go through boot camp, we go through the military world, and we're warriors. We're warriors, right? Well, 1%. We've been taught, trained, and rough sacked through. Suck it up, right?
Mhm.
Get that thought out of your mind, right? Don't be a coward, right? So I'm thinking, how much of this crap am I making up and how much of it's real? And then I can't talk about, but getting confirmation from my sister was another piece of healing because when she said it to this day, I can feel the whole shift inside of me drop down one notch. It was like, see, it did happen. You did survive that. You are a good person, right? It's like, where the hell did that one come from? All of a sudden, good comments start filtering in, right? Once you start healing. So for me, when people ask me about how's the healing, many of us look at things linear, right?
Mhm.
Listen, it's pockmarked with little pieces everywhere that say this was a good piece to add to that healing process. Okay. Mine's ongoing. I've got a ton of healing to do. I work on it. I love to say daily, but I would say I don't. All right. I definitely work on it. Not too many days go by where I'm not aggressively working on my path forward.
And that's what it takes. It's being open to receiving these intuitive messages like meditate, and following those breadcrumbs and having the courage to follow that wherever it takes you. What are some other practices that you have incorporated other than meditation that have served you well?
Well, one of the biggest things that I'm trying to promote, especially to my fellow veterans and their family, spouses, and so on. You got to learn to clear yourself. Right? What does that mean? What does it mean to you when I say clear yourself?
I've been having this conversation lately with people that because of course when you're in relationship with people there's conflict, bound to be conflict at some point, right? And what I have noticed and how I know that have done a lot of work on myself is when someone can say something and I feel a certain way about it. I feel activated by it. I won't say triggered because you can be activated or triggered, but when I'm feeling activated by something, I can step back and be like, okay, why am I feeling this way about this? And and I can also hear things and it go in one ear and out the other and not stick to me because I've swept my own doorstep. that's how I know that I've come a long way, because I used to take things so personally. I used to think there was something wrong with me. And, it's been a really long journey. It's been a 10-year journey for me in my healing. And so I want to hear what you were going to say.
So earlier you had mentioned energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Energy is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And as scientists have proven, right? The good side of college boys, I imagine, right? Energy never disappears. It just changes its form.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So where does all that anger go that we veterans have, right? Goes out into the universe, right? Or does it stick to us? Or does it do both? Okay. So I'm sitting there watching my wife going up and down the aisle every Sunday to get communion, right? I'm like, why do they do this? Why? The body of Christ, the blood of Christ. What are they doing? Okay. Again, I'm kind of condensing a lot into a very short, and I'm looking at my Native Americanism and I'm studying as never before. And when warriors would come back from a battle, shaman, the medicine man, the holy man would hold them outside the village and he would sage them, sweetgrass, cedar, tobacco, right? He would clear them. Why? Because he wanted to get all the dark energy off and out of them so they didn't infect the village. Infect the village, probably a little strong word, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm studying this and I'm saying, okay. So for me, I started saying, where is all this dark energy going? Where's all this darkness? Right? Every time we get mad, you can feel it. And it takes so much work to release it, right? To clear yourself. So I found myself after walking this path doing exactly what you did, where I used to get mad when somebody would say something. It's starting to go out one, okay, and it doesn't register, okay, unless I'm starting to get backed up. I'm starting to get blocked. I'm starting to have too much of other people's energy around me. Okay. So again, I had to learn, what is it to clear? What am I doing? We need to get the darkness out of us. Okay. Again, physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional. If we're physically in pain, is it radiating energy? Of course it is. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So is our spirit. So is all the energy around us. So when somebody comes at you with hate, or you, for me, walking into the VA, that place is just vile. You're picking up and absorbing all of that energy. So what I did was I focused heavily on the Catholic, I focused heavily on my Native American, and I watched and I studied what the communion is. Well, the greatest way to draw that piece together is with Father Amoth. He died a little while ago. He was the Vatican's chief um, exorcist. Okay, and he wrote. I've read almost every one of his books. Great, phenomenal guy. He wrote that I do hundreds of exorcisms every single day. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? I'm thinking pea soup and all that, right? He goes, no, these people come and they line up at my door so they can get the body of Christ, so that they can get the blood of Christ, so that he can put their hand on him and invoke God's will and light to come through them and to clear all that doesn't belong inside of you, to clear the darkness. And people line up every day to go do this. They go every Sunday, and what are they doing? They're renewing their connection to what they believe in the Catholics, the baby Jesus, the light of Christ, and so on, right? Native Americans, same thing, different approach. You watch the Catholics use a wafer or a jug of oil, a jug of wine, right? Oil, right? For baptisms, right? Marriages, right? And the smoke for burials, right? What do Native Americans do? Sage, cedar, sweetgrass, and tobacco. Now, listen, if you mix all four, you're neutralizing all the darkness around you and all the darkness in you by doing the same things the Catholics do. You're getting exercised or cleared.
Mm-hmm.
Once I started going down this path, I could start feeling the darkness, other people's anger coming at me. Okay. So I said, how do I protect against this? So I learned how to protect against this. And then I went from being, on the wrong side of things to being on the positive side of things. Right now, I'm doing it daily. Okay. Clearing people, clearing houses, getting rid of darkness. I'm doing this often. Okay. So when you asked what, kind of what do I do? So listen, I love being around my wife and I love doing spiritual work. Okay. To me, this is all part of spiritual work. How'd you like that one for an answer?
No, I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. I actually am Catholic, and to hear you share your perspective of that, and I wasn't always, I'm a convert. So to hear your perspective, and to be fair, I mean, that was a huge part of my healing as well, was finding something I believed in again, to find my faith, which, thanks to my husband at the time, but it wasn't pressured on me. It wasn't forced on me. I had to come to that myself. And I think we naturally do when we start to open ourselves up to more, that more is possible. And I think when we're talking about suicide, um, I mean, I'm imagine you would agree, is that you don't feel like that more is possible, like more goodness, like goodness is possible.
Yeah, you've given up on all of it.
Mhm.
You've absolutely given up. There is no more. Okay. The reason the title is A Date with Suicide is what I learned from talking to many veterans was that, we're so anal that we line everything else up. Okay. And then the last thing we do is set a date. Okay. Now, veterans that have attempted suicide almost to a man or woman tell me the same thing. Okay. With few exceptions. Okay. Some of them will say, well, I thought of a date, but I need to put everything in line before I set the date. Right. So we've got to get to veterans before they set that date. Because once they set that date, the week after my last book came out, A Date with Suicide, a guy I served with 40 years ago committed suicide. Okay. Floored me. Okay. Couldn't believe it. Guy I served with reaches out and says, I'm reading your book on a plane back. Just buried, blah, blah, who committed suicide. Right. I'm like, okay. Statistically, if you look at what the VA says, whether it's 17 or 22, it is a miscarriage of fact to be nice. Okay. The VA is aware of about 20% of the veterans, but they claim they're engaged with 35% of veterans. So let's use their number, 35%. In 2014 through 2018, the VA redid a study and came back in 18 and said, we've decreased the number to 17 veteran suicide a day. And they were all proud of themselves, right? Okay. Operation Deep Dive picked up from there. And for the last 7 or 8 years, through a couple of different universities, including um, uh, um, Duke University now, they focused on 8 states and it's now going national. It's called Operation Deep Dive. If you guys are all familiar with um, Navy Corpsman Christine Walker, she's the chief editor of At Ease magazine. She owns it. She puts an article for Operation Deep Dive in her magazine every quarter it comes out. Okay. Operation Deep Dive is a great piece of literature to read and look at the research. In its 2-page conclusion, it says that the VA used bogus numbers to come up with their 17 per day. But even based on their 17 per day, the reality is it's 2.4 times higher than the suicide rate, which puts it in the 40s. So their position is it's in the 40s. My position is if it's 17 a day and you're only seeing a third of the veterans, why can't we just do the math and say, well, that's 50 plus? So that's
Mhm.
kind of the conclusion of where I come from. 50 veterans a day are committing suicide. I believe the reality is so much more than that. Okay. Because so many of our veterans, especially our young veterans, I've handheld quite a few of them to try to get them into the system. And it's a nightmare. How many of them are we losing when they bang on the front door of the VA? They need mental help, right? And they get turned away. Now, the VA will say they don't turn you away. Well, that's bullshit. Okay. If you don't have a rating, the only thing you can do is walk into the day clinic and sit there for as long as it takes in that spot until somebody can see you, if they can see you. In the hearing last week, I watched this guy say that, well, we're only having 2 veterans commit suicide on our property. And the congressman, retired Navy SEAL, lost it. And he says, that's bullshit. There's 20 different facilities that have reported at least two. So that's 40. And his
Mhm.
response was, well, most of those are off VA grounds. Okay. Well, why? Because a lot of VAs have certain places, and then the parking lots are on private land or state owned land. Okay. Again, I won't jump back on that soapbox. Okay. But anyway, I kind of lost where we were going with this. So they kind of widened that topic out. Sorry.
No, I'm glad we brought it back to the suicide topic. And thank you for mentioning Operation Deep Dive. That wasn't in my awareness before.
Yeah. You want to give a read to that?
Um, what is in your life experience, the grief, trauma? What has grief taught you, and what is the message that you would like to share with veterans listening to this who may be struggling today?
The second part is easy. The first part is difficult to answer. It's not difficult to answer because I'm reluctant. It's difficult to answer because I'm a very odd duck. All right. I have a deep faith in the baby Jesus, and I have a deep faith in my Native Americanism, but I also believe in reincarnation. I believe in we're here for a reason. Okay. My first suicide was Randy Smith. Okay, a guy I served with. That's the story I write in the book. Okay. That's why I kind of coined the phrase "Who's your Randy," meaning who's your first suicide. So for me, I look back at this now that I've kind of spent over a decade digging into and learning about my spiritual faith. I see all of this happening so that I can write the book. I see everything that I went through so that I would grow my soul and be able to relate to people more, have empathy for, to learn something that I never thought I would even have the conversation with, like you can never judge somebody else's trauma. I never would have drawn that conclusion had I not gone through boot camp, dealt with what I dealt with, and then sat down and wrote the book, right? So I view this from a very limited a way where most people don't. Okay. For my fellow veterans, listen, there's so much more that we're supposed to do. So I'm going to guilt you here a little bit and tell you that the civilian suicide rate is exploding. And I'm going to tell you that we all know that what we do as veterans, civilians follow. So a little bit of a guilt trip here. We've got to stop killing ourselves to save civilians' lives because they're looking at us saying, well, if they can't deal with it, then it's easy for them to say, I can kill myself, right? I personally think the civilian suicide rate is north of a couple hundred a day, and I think it's exploding. Anyway, tell your story. If you're not familiar with Don, are you familiar with Donald Dunn out of Missouri?
Mm.
He wrote a book that is this thick. Okay, I mean it's literally that thick. Okay, Donald Dunn, phenomenal book. I usually have it with me to show on these podcasts. All right, he tells it. I swear, I think he wrote this with a crayon, and then somebody typed it. Okay, it is that down home. It is straight to the point, and it tells all the same stories I tell, except I spent forever writing it in long form. Okay, but he really comes out and lays it out of how close he came to suicide, and to a man, when people have come to me and said, "Okay, your book stopped me from committing suicide," my next question is why, and they said, I read in there things that I didn't know I didn't have. One, a purpose, right? Two, I didn't know other veterans were dealing with transitioning out of the military like I was. Okay. I was shocked at people are shocked at veterans saying how many of us realize that we were abandoned when we left the military. Again, the system is what it is, but that feeling of abandonment jumps right back at us when the gate hits us in the backside, right? Especially if you've gone through childhood trauma. Okay. If not, then it's your first real feeling of abandonment. And it's hard to re-find yourself. So you've got to find yourself and find a purpose. Well, what is your purpose right now? Well, I'm giving you one. Tell your story. So if you don't think you have a purpose, reach out to me. and I'm going to help you understand that you have a purpose. If you tell your story one time, you have no idea the pebble in the pond effect it can have in helping others. But to bring it back to Don Dunn's book, he didn't tell his wife anything about what was going on. Wait a minute, didn't I already say this?
Mm-hmm.
No, that was me. I said I didn't tell my wife for 50 years until I handed her the book. Well, Don Dunn didn't tell his family anything until they read the book. Are we seeing a trend line here? Okay. So we're keeping all of this inside of us because we think we're helping our friends, our family, our loved ones by not burdening them with our story. Well, listen, I'm telling you, your loved ones need to hear your story. We all need to hear your story. The more of us that come forward and tell the story, the easier it's going to be for the rest of us to keep telling our story and to help others take a step up and tell their story. You got to tell your story. Read other people's story and just sit down and write it. You don't have to print it. You don't have to. You just write it. Write the longest email to yourself you've ever done, and then burn it. Tell your story.
It's good advice. Thank you for sharing all of that. Um, there's one thing I want to say, and it's about the word committed. You know, when we say this person committed suicide, the Grief Recovery Institute helped me reframe that and shared a different perspective of that word. Because when we say committed, you know, when it's like someone committing murder, that's a crime. So when we say committed, it's like they're committing a crime. So the Grief Recovery Institute actually has helped me realize the importance of words. And so instead, I say completed suicide or died by suicide because it takes off that it feeling like a crime. Because there's a lot of shame in that families feel, the people that are left behind, right? You know?
Yes, I do. I do. I'm in a fist fight, if you will, over getting people to stop hiding suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's like, listen, okay. Again, it's going to take me a while to not say committed, but okay. Your loved one killed himself. Okay. If you think that reflects on you, then you're not helping the rest of us
Mm-hmm.
because it seems to me like the last taboo subject in this world is suicide. Everything else we can talk about, right? Well, why is it so taboo? Well, the Bible frowns on suicide, right? It says you commit suicide, it's a mortal sin. You're going to hell for forever. Do I buy that? Nope, not at all. Okay. Do I tell people that they should buy it? Listen, you got to figure out your own path. Okay. It's not my place to tell you what to think or to believe. You figure that out, right? To me, it isn't. I've had to forgive everyone that I know that's committed suicide because it's not mine to keep. It's not mine to take. And more importantly, I survived the physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional pain that brought me to that point. The pain is so overwhelming. How can anybody that loves a person want them to continue to live with that kind of pain? A razor blade tumbleweed constantly in your gut, your mind refusing to shut off, your body in so much physical pain you can't take it. There's no end. And you've lost your faith. So your entire existence getting absorbed by darkness, evil thoughts. Why how can you hold it against somebody that just can't take it anymore? Okay? I can't. I'm not advocating for suicide. I'm advocating for those of us who have survived and those of us who have to live, with the memory of those who killed themselves, right? You got to think along these lines. When the pain got so severe, it took its toll. Okay. Few people talk about what it took to get to that point of suicide. And I'm here to say, telling you, look at it. And again, like the mental health professionals that are reading my book are saying, I've never heard any of them approach it from the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual standpoint of you have to attack all four. Not at the same time, pick one and get moving, and the rest will follow, right? Then you need to learn to keep the faith and keep moving forward. So at the end, a veteran is still a veteran. Suck it up, find a path forward. We can do this. Reach out. We're all here. We're all suffering the same crap, different levels. You're no different than us. You're not alone. We get it. Your story's no worse than everybody else's. It's no better than everybody else's. We're all the same. We're 1%. We're veterans. We got issues. We got stories, and we need to be telling them to ourselves. And the last thing I'll say, any veteran out there that maligns another veteran, like saying something like, well, what makes you think you're a veteran? You weren't in combat. Okay. Like, well, why would you say that? Or, well, I did all these things and you didn't. Why would you say that? Why would you say that? I went to boot camp with a kid who tried to kill himself because he couldn't take the yelling. When I was in A school, I watched a E2 shaking like a leaf because he had two captains and an admiral around him. Kid couldn't function. And that's when I swore I don't want to ever be in one of these scenarios. I wonder what happened to that kid. All I know is he was so terrified around two captains and an admiral, he couldn't function. Another kid would chain smoke outside like there was no tomorrow. Why? He was never in combat, but something happened to him because he signed the line, joined the military, successfully moved through boot camp, successfully moved through the next things, and something snapped. Something happened. Combination of life, girlfriend leaving him, wife, kids, what? Don't know. It's not our story to tell. But don't judge somebody else's trauma and don't harm another veteran by, downplaying what they did. I'll close that little soapbox with this. One guy I talked to never left the United States. In fact, went to Maryland, spent 8 years there. At the 8-year point, the end of his enlistment, he was doing one of two things. He was getting out and or killing himself. Couldn't decide which one was going to be first. He didn't kill himself, but it was close. And when I asked him, what's your story? He was like, couldn't take it anymore. What? His job was to be in perfect uniform and carry fellow dead soldiers off of the planes flying into Maryland or Delaware, right? Andrews, where they fly him in. That was his job. That's all he did for 8 years. Boot camp school, got picked up for this thing and stayed there. The stress and trauma of carrying dead servicemen took its toll on him to the point of becoming like the rest of us who are, chasing a date with suicide, right? Doesn't matter what we did in the service. Doesn't matter whether you're a line cook or frontline infantry. Doesn't matter whether you were a Navy SEAL, because they are killing themselves too. Or if you were just a bosun's mate painting the battleships, right? Battleships, we don't have any of those, do we? Aircraft carriers, okay? Everyone's just as important, and we have to suck it up and stick together. We can't be maligning each other.
It's a great way to end, but I want to ask, is there anything else that you can think of that you didn't get to share that you want to?
Well, no, I think you got a great format. I think you do a great job of getting the message out to veterans. You're easy to talk with. So I encourage all vets to reach out and get on your show or listen to your show. And, thank you for all the things that you're doing. It's very helpful to have the wide breadth of conversation that we're having.
And thank you for sharing that. I appreciate you and your time today and the work that you are doing, because it does, like you said, it takes all of us. And yeah, just so much gratitude for you. So thank you so much. Where can people reach you or find you? Where are you on socials if they want to reach out to you and connect?
So you can find me on Facebook at D Paul Fleming. If you want to find me on Twitter, same thing, D Paul Fleming. But I also have a big account that's Vet Wellness. Okay, if you don't want to get engaged in the politics, don't reach out to me on that one. All right. But if you want to just do vet stuff, D Paul Fleming, you can email me or, my
Your
contact
website?
information's out there. Yeah. dpaulfleming.com. Okay.
And
Um,
I'll
buy a book and
book.
pass it around to a veteran. All right. And tell your story.
And I will put the links to those where people can find you in the show notes. And thank you again for everything. And remember, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.